We are live now, ma'am. I will be
Yeah.
starting with the session. Hari Om, everyone. A warm welcome to the seventh session of Iron Anatomy, a lecture series for the first year BMS students. The exclusive sessions will be taken up by the eminent speakers of anatomy across the country for a period of 27 days. We started from 23rd June and will be running up to the 17th of July. Before starting the session, let me introduce you to Jignasa. Jignasa is a pan-India platform of Ayush fraternity led by the student community of Bharata and was initiated by ABVP in the year 1998. Its motto is Learn Ayush to Practice Ayush. It involves empowering Ayush students from campus to community, bridging the gap between Ayush students and policymakers as well as administrative authorities, connecting every aspect of Ayush including students, academicians, practitioners, scientists, industrialists and hospitals all under one umbrella. Think globally, act locally. In last 2 decades, our efforts were to strengthen the Ayush education system and boost confidence among Ayush students. Jignasa initiated various programs in different parts of the country, from the grassroots to international platforms, through discussions, study circles, seminars, workshops, and conferences. Let me list a few initiatives undertaken by Jignasa: study circles, lecture series on specific topics, free medical camps, social health, status survey, hands-on training workshops, conferences to explore and learn unique aspects of Ayurveda, interaction with eminent Vaidyas and academicians, brainstorming sessions with Ayush stalwarts, policymakers, and key stakeholders of Ayush systems, National Arogya Expo and International Conference, national level seminars, medicinal plants visits, pharmaceutical visits, agitations for the demands of Ayush student community, private internship program for interested students to learn with acharyas, interaction with traditional healers, and visit to explore regional flora. And adding to that, online mock tests, social awareness campaigns on various issues, campaigns for the promotions of various concepts of high systems for local welfare and social welfare, for example, Swarna Bindu Prashana camp, group Surya Namaskara, and yoga competitions, etc. Free healthcare assistance to people through local governing body during natural calamities and accidents, and many more. In our yesterday sessions, more than 400 to 500 students joined for the live session and asked their queries regarding the subject. And examinations. And so far, we have received 5,000 plus views on our YouTube videos regarding the hair anatomy series. We hope to reach as many students as possible who can take maximum benefit out of it. Vidya Nama Narasya, Rupam Adhikam Prachana Guptam Dhanam. We have seen the inability of government students to offer huge amounts on commercial study platforms despite their jignasa, that is their burning desire to learn. Jignasa is here to give a helping hand. Learn anatomy with experts, and all we need is your immense interest to learn. Today, we have Dr. Uma ma'am from SDM Hassan. Ma'am, we welcome you to the session for and to each and everyone who is watching this. Hope you find it helpful. Now, I would like to welcome Shobita, State Committee Member Jignasa, to give a quick introduction about ma'am and welcome ma'am. Shobita.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening, everyone. It is a great honor to me to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ruma B. Gopal, who has graciously accepted our invitation to join us this evening and share her insights with us. Dr. Ruma B. Gopal is a highly accomplished individual in the field of Ayurveda. Ma'am has done her BA/MS at Government College of Indian Medicine, Mysore. She has completed her MD in Udupi SDM College and is currently professor and head of anatomy in SDM College of Ayurveda, Hassan. Ma'am has presented many scientific papers in national and international conference, published 50 articles in reputed peer-reviewed journal. She is presently working on a funded research project of RGUHS, a comparative study of Z Pramana Sharira in normal and mentally challenged individuals with special reference to intellect quotient. Ma'am has nearly 25 years of experience. Ma'am has served as BOS member of RGUHS, presently subject expert for PhD studies in Rachna Sharira, and has 30 years of experience. Created numerous innovative models, organized 3 national level workshops with hands-on training. Dr. Uma B. Gopal has achieved great success and has significantly contributed to the community and society. Your achievement and dedication to your work serve as great inspiration to us all, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Yes, ma'am, you are audible, ma'am. Thank you, Shobita, for welcoming the ma'am. Ma'am, now I would like to request you to carry forward with the session.
Okay. First of all, I thank Jignasa Karnataka for giving me an opportunity to share the knowledge regarding the anatomy of female reproductive system. And I'm going to start now. So the female reproductive system is made up of organs which are present internally and also externally. So the organs which are present, the genital organs which are present externally are the mons pubis, the labia majora, labia minora, clitoris, vestibule of vagina, bulb of vestibule, and the greater vestibular glands. All these, all these are present in the region of perineum. So what is perineum? Perineum is a diamond-shaped space which is situated in the lower part of the trunk between the medial aspect of the two thighs. So in the perineum, the diamond-shaped perineum is actually divided into two triangles, the anti-triangle and the posterior triangle. In the anti-triangle, these are structures which is called as pudendum or the vulva or external genitalia is situated. So within this, the structures are categorized as this: mons pubis, labia majora, labia minora, clitoris, bulba vestibule, vestibule of vagina, and the greater vestibular glands. So when we go on to each description of each part of female genitalia, the external genital organ situated in the anti-triangle of the perineum, outside the pelvic cavity, first of all, just enter to the pubic symphysis, we see a rounded eminence. The mons pubis is a rounded eminence present in front of the pubic symphysis, formed by the accumulation of subcutaneous fat and covered with the pubic hair. It covers the anterior surface of pubic symphysis and the anterior surface of bodies of the two pubic bone. Then comes the labia majora. So labia majora are two thick folds of skin enclosing the fat. They form the lateral boundaries of the pudendal cleft. Their outer surfaces are covered with hair and the inner surface is studded with large sebaceous gland that you can see in the figure. So the large anterior ends of the labia majora is connected to each other below the mons pubis to form the anterior commissure where they unite together. The skin containing the posterior ends of the labia is known as posterior commissure, which lies posteriorly between the anal canal and the gynecological perineum. The area between the posterior commissure and the anus, which is about 2.5 centimeters long, constitutes the gynecological perineum, which is used for episiotomy, the right and the left episiotomy, to avoid perineal tear. Labia minora. So the labia minora are two thin folds of skin which lie within the pudendal cleft. Anteriorly, each labia splits into two layers. The upper layer joins the corresponding layer of the opposite side to form the prepuce of clitoris. So that covers the anterior surface of clitoris. Then comes the lower layers. The lower layers of the two sides of the labia minora join to form the frenulum of clitoris. Posteriorly, the two labia minora meets to form frenulum of labia minora. The inner surface of the labia minora contain numerous sebaceous glands and it doesn't have the hair cells. The clitoris. Clitoris is an erectile organ homologous with the penis and it is not traversed by the urethra. Whereas in male, the penis is traversed, the bulbospongiosis and the corporospongiosum of the penis is traversed throughout by the urethra, but here it is not traversed by the urethra. It lies anteriorly in the pudendal cleft. The body of clitoris is made up of two corpora cavernosa enclosed in a fibrous sheath and partly separated by an incomplete pectiniform septa. The corpus spongiosum is absent. Only corpus cavernosum is present. Corpus spongiosum is absent in the clitoris. Each corpus cavernosum is attached to the ischiopubic rami. The downturned free end of the clitoris is formed by a rounded tubercle called glans clitoridis, which caps the free ends of the corpora. It is highly sensitive, made up of erectile tissue, which continues posteriorly with the commissural venous plexus. This venous plexus unite with the right and the left bulbar vestibule called as bulbar commissure. So venous plexus itself is called as bulbar commissure as it joins the posterior end of the bulbar vestibule. The surface of glans is highly sensitive and plays an important role in sexual responses during the time of coitus. Vestibule of vagina. So here in the figure you can see it has been widened and you can see a large opening inside. So vestibule is a space between the the two folds of labia minora, the space what you can see is called as the vestibule. And within the vestibule, the following features can be seen. The urethral orifice lies about 2.5 centimeters below and behind the clitoris and just in front of the vaginal orifice. The vaginal orifice as introitus opening lies in the posterior part of vestibule and is partly closed in the virgin by a thin membrane. That means the external vaginal orifice is covered by a thin membrane called as hymen. So in married women, the hymen is represented by a rounded tags of tissue called as caruncle hymenal because of rupture of the hymen, which is nothing but the fold of mucous membrane. Orifices of the duct of greater vestibular gland, the mucus secreting glands, lie on each side of the vaginal orifice between the hymen and the labia minus. The opening, it opens out into the pudendum, or it is the vestibule of introitus. Numerous lesser vestibular glands or mucous gland open on the surface of vestibule. So the epithelial lining of the vestibule, deep to it, it is made up of mucosal glands, and these glands are numerous and they are called as lesser vestibular glands. But the greater vestibular gland is only two in number on either side as a content of the external, the superficial perineal pouch, and the duct is 2 centimeters long and open out into the vestibule in between the hymen and the labia minora. The posterior part of vestibule between the vaginal orifice and the frenulum of labia minora forms a shallow depression known as vestibular fossa. So this lies posteriorly below the opening of the vagina. Bulb of vestibule. Bulb of vestibule are two oval bodies of erectile tissue that correspond to the two halves of the bulb of penis. This is in two different tissues. Why it is so? When in male it is a single bulb of penis because it is invaginated by the two openings. The urethral opening and the vaginal opening splits the erectile tissue, the bulb of vestibule, into two parts. That's why you can see on either side of the vaginal and the urethral orifice in the form of two bulb-like structure, and that is called as bulb of vestibule, covered by the bulbospongiosus muscle. The bulbs lie on either side of the vagina and the urethra superficial to the perineal membrane. The tapering anterior ends of the bulb are united in front of the urethra by a venous plexus called as bulbar commissure, what we have discussed when we discussed regarding the clitoris. The expanded posterior ends of the bulb partly overlap the greater vestibular glands. Now going on to the greater vestibular glands, or it is also called as Bartholian glands because it was first identified by the scientist called as Bartholin. Greater vestibular gland are homologous with the bulbourethral gland of Cooper in the male. These lie in the superficial perineal space. Each gland has a long duct, about 2 centimeters long, which opens at the side of the hymen, between the hymen and the labia minus. That also you can see in the figure. Here you can see on either side of the vaginal opening. So these are the Bartholin glands, and this is the opening between the hymen and the labia minus. So now going on to the internal genital organs of the female reproductive system, it can be divided into uterus, the fallopian tube, the ovaries, the cervix, and the vagina. So we'll deal with it one by one. So first of all, it is the uterus. So the uterus is a hollow piriform muscular organ situated in the pelvis between the bladder, below and in front, and the rectum and the sigmoid colon above and behind. So the uterus, when it's in normal size, it is the content of true pelvis. Within the pelvic cavity, it is the content of true pelvis and present deep to the pelvic brim. On each side of the uterus, it receives the opening of uterine tube at the superolateral angle. The superolateral angle, you can see here, I will take the cursor. Superolateral angle is also called as cornua and communicates below with the vagina through the external os of the cervix. See, this is the vagina. So this is the external os of the cervix. So there are three communications here. Right fallopian tube, left fallopian tube, and then the vagina through this is the vagina and through the external os of the cervix. Here you can see anterior to the uterus, you can see the bladder, urethra, within the anterior wall of the vagina, you can see that. You can see the rectum posteriorly, uterus in between. Okay, this is the sacrum, this is the pubic symphysis, this is the retropubic pad of fat, and this is the enococcygeal ligament. Okay, this is the region of perineal body, and this is the vaginal opening, this is the uterine cavity. Okay, and you can see the double layer here. This is the lining membrane of peritoneum covering, and it is a subperitoneal structure. All these three are the subperitoneal structures. So now going on to the axis of the uterus. So there are two types of uterus, retroverted and antiverted uterus. Version means which is verted, means which is flexed. So antiversion is, it is a forward angle between the axis of the cervix and that of the vagina measuring about 90 degrees. You can see the long axis of the uterus, or you can take it as long axis of the cervix, makes an angle of 90 degree with the long axis of the vagina. And that is called as angle of antiversion. Angle of antiflexion is that where the uterus itself bends on its cervix. So the long axis of the body of uterus makes an angle of 120 degrees or 120 to 25 degree with the long axis of the cervix. And this is called as angle of antiflexion. So in retroverted uterus, the long axis of the uterus will be in almost in same line as the long axis of the vagina. So it lies posteriorly over the rectum, not over the bladder anteriorly. So the dimensions of the uterus. So it is, you can remember easily, 1, 2, 3. 1 inch in thickness, 2 inch in its width, and 3 inches in its length. If you are going to convert the inches in the form of centimeter, the measurement will be, length will be 7.5 to 8 centimeters, width will be 5 centimeters, and thickness of the uterus will be 2.5 centimeters. The subdivisions of the uterus. You can see the three colors represent the fundus. The body, yellow color is the body, and the blue color represents the cervix of the uterus. Below the cervix, the cavity, what you can see is the vaginal cavity. So now going on to the fundus of the uterus, it is an expanded end of the body which is situated above the imaginary plane. So when you are going to draw an horizontal plane from the opening fallopian tube of right to the left, just above that, the part of the uterus, what you can see is nothing but the fundus. The fundus is directed forwards and convex on all sides, covered with the peritoneum. Then comes the body. It extends from the fundus. This is the fundus. From fundus to the isthmus. Isthmus is a constricted part between the body and the cervix. It's also called as a neck. So that part is called as the body. It is flattened anteroposteriorly and wider in the upper part and contains the uterine cavity. So the cavity, what you can see here, up to here, this is the internal loss of the cervix. So up to here, this is the uterine cavity present in the upper uterine segment. This is the region. So the features, external features, it is made up of two surfaces. Anterior surface, which is related with the bladder, and the posterior surface, which is related with the rectum, and is made up of two borders, ill-defined border, right lateral border, left lateral borders. And it is made up of, when you take a sagittal section here, coronal section, you can see the cavity which is triangular in shape. If you take a sagittal section, it looks like a slit. If you take a coronal section, it looks like a triangular shape and become continuous with the fallopian tube. At the superlateral angle, it is called as the cornu. So now going on to the anterior wall or vesical surface of the uterus. It is flat, directed downwards and forwards, and covered with the peritoneum up to the isthmus. Hence, the peritoneum is reflected onto the upper surface of the urinary bladder, forming the utero-vesical pouch. You can see here, this is the peritoneum covering the fundus, peritoneum covering the anterior surface of uterus, but completely anterior wall of uterus is not covered by peritoneum. Peritoneum reflect on the superior surface of urinary bladder and extends as parietal peritoneum deep to the anterior abdominal wall. So this is called as utero-vesical fold of peritoneum. Okay. So that is the relations of anterior surface of uterus. Next, going on to the posterior intestinal surface. The rectum is a part of intestine here. The rectum, you can see the ampullary part of the rectum The upper part of the upper one third of the rectum is only covered by peritoneum anterolaterally, but middle one third part of the rectum is covered only anteriorly. And immediately what happens when you do the per digital examination, per rectal examination, this is the lowermost part of the peritoneum as it reflects over the posterior surface of uterus. And if you do the per rectal examination, it's about 7 centimeters deep. Okay, so this flow is reflected over the posterior surface and over the fundus, and the pouch is formed here. It is called as Kuldai sac, or it is also called as the pouch of Douglas. So the fold peritoneum which reflect on the uterus, that's why this fold of peritoneum is called as recto-uterine pouch of peritoneum. This is called as fold Kuldai sac or pouch of Douglas. This will be usually asked in the Viva and also as an MCQ. Next is the lateral borders. You can see the lateral borders. It is completely like a cloth which is covering the uterus completely, including the fallopian tube, including the ovary. There is a broad fold of peritoneum which covers posteriorly, which covers on the superior surface, which covers anteriorly. So completely uterus is wrapped as a cloth by the peritoneum. So this broad fold of peritoneum which extend laterally from the lateral borders of the uterus is called as broad ligament of uterus. So this the figure what you can see is the posterior view of uterus with the ligament of ovary and the ovary, and then it's a fimbriated end of the fallopian tube in connection with the uterine pole of the ovary. Just above that you can see the fallopian tube. Fallopian tube lies in the free edge of the upper border of the broad ligament, but it is not free. It is covered by the superiorly, it is covered by the broad ligament of uterus. So that part, the fold of peritoneum between the fallopian tube and the ovary is called as, this border is called as anterior border, and the part of fold of broad ligament is called as mesovarium. Okay, you can also see the fold of peritoneum where it is devoid. This is a region which has been exposed, the vagina, cavity of vagina, and the opening of external os of the cervix, which opens out into the vaginal cavity. So here it is completely wrapped with the broad ligament of uterus. So the broad ligament extend. You can see the fimbriated end of the fallopian tube and the opening called as abdominal ostium, which opens out into the greater sac of peritoneum. So when you keep a step on the right and the left iliac fossa, and you are going to push the air, okay, into the uterus. Okay, so the air which enters into the uterus passes through the fallopian tube, and if the fallopian tube is patent, the air leaks into the peritoneal cavity through the opening here in the center of the fimbriated end of the fallopian tube, for presenting the hissing sound. And that is the diagnosis of the fallopian tube is patent or not. If at all, if you cannot hear the hissing sound by keeping the steth over the right and the left inguinal region, it is called as the inflammation of fallopian tube, or it is also called as salpingitis. That's the importance of this broad ligament of uterus, the fallopian tube, fimbriated end of the fallopian tube, and the opening there. So the lateral borders are round and non-peritoneal. Non-peritoneal, why it is non-peritoneal? Because the broad ligament is made up of double layer. As it reaches the lateral border, it passes laterally. So the space, a narrow space between the anterior wall and the posterior wall of broad ligament of uterus is devoid of peritoneum. The border is related to the tortuous uterine vessels in between the two layers of broad ligament of uterus. The lateral angles of the cornua of uterus. The lateral angles is also called as cornua. It projects outwards from the junction of fundus and the body. Each angle presents the attachment of three structures. So, three structures. So, superiorly, you can see the fallopian tube. And posteriorly, inferiorly, you can see the ovary is attached to the inferior-lateral angle of the uterus by a ligament called as ligament of ovary. Like that, anteriorly, the figure is not given. So anterior-inferiorly, there's a ligament. You can see here it is coming out here. So from anterior-inferiorly at the superolateral angle, it gives attachment for a ligament called as round ligament of uterus. The round ligament of uterus pulls the uterus anteriorly, fixes it anteriorly, anchors it anteriorly. But the ligament of ovary attaches it into the uterine pole of the ovary. Next, structure of understand the body. From within outward, the uterus presents. You can see here now the deep structure, what you cannot see through the gross dissection. So, the lining membrane of the uterine cavity is called as endometrium, the epithelial lining. Then, deep to it, the muscle of the uterus is called as myometrium. Outside to that, the coat, the serous coat, made up of peritoneum, is called as perimetrium. Now, the endometrium. Endometrium or mucous membrane of the body of uterus consists of surface epithelium. Deep to it, it is made up of lamina propria. So, you have to remember here that before puberty, the surface is lined by ciliated columnar epithelium. Because of wear and tear, because of the menstrual cycle, each time it will be the ciliated epithelium is got denuded. There will be destruction. Because of that, there won't be formation of the cilia, and it is made up of only simple columnar epithelium that lines the uterine cavity, and that is called as endometrium. So, endometrium is made up of surface epithelium and the lamina propria. So, the lamina propria, deep to the epithelial lining, contain the cells called as stromal cells. In between the stromal cells, there are glands, mucus secreting glands, and the glucose secreting glands, which nourishes the fetus. Okay, that is called as tubular uterine glands. Then comes the blood vessels, the lymphatics, and the nerves, what you can see in between the stromal cells as the content of the lamina propria. The uterine glands extend up to the inner surface of myometrium and are lined by simple columnar cells with occasional cilia. When you go on to the functional endometrium, the functional endometrium is divided into two parts. So here it is a mistake. It is not outer basal layer, it is the inner basal layer and the outer functional layer. Functional layer is outside. This is the functional layer, which gets each time there is a menstrual cycle, this will come out as the content of the menstrual fluid. This is the basal layer which will remain along with the part of gland here, uterine glands, the blood vessels, the venous ends. What you can see, this is the basal layer, it is inner. Functional layer is outside. Each time it is formed, the bed is formed to receive the fetus, to receive the embryo for the development. Then if fertilization doesn't occur, it will come out in the form of the menstrual content. So after ovulation, the next phase, the secretory phase, is always constant, where after 14 days, if there is no fertilization, it come out in the form of menstrual blood. So the functional layer undergoes changes during the menstrual cycle and is cast off in each month with uterine bleeding. The basal layer remains practically unaltered and helps in regeneration of epithelial lining or the denuded endometrium from basal ends of the uterine glands. Blood supply to the endometrium, you can see here the ovarian artery derived out of abdominal aorta, passes through the infundibulopelvic ligament, enter into the broad ligament of uterus, passes related to the fallopian tube, below the fallopian tube, and along the edges, the lateral wall of the uterus and the inferior surface, the fallopian tube. Okay, so this ovarian artery, okay, enters into the myometrium of the uterus. Then the myometrium is made up of three types of muscle tissue, where it arches, and it is called as arcuate artery. From the arcuate artery, there are radial artery which passes deep and deep towards the endometrium. So as it passes, it gives out the arteries which enters into the basal layer of endometrium and that which were functional layer of endometrium. In the functional layer, it is spiral. That's called as spiral arteries. And in the basal layer, it passes again radially, and it is the part which helps in regeneration of the endometrium after the menstrual cycle, first one menstruation. The functional layer is supplied by the spiral arteries here. Endometrial changes in menstrual cycle is divided into 5 phases now. So the first phase is menstrual phase, 1 to 3 days, or it may extend up to 5 days. Regenerative phase is 2 days. Proliferative phase is the starting up to the level of ovulation and 1 or 2 days after ovulation. Secretory phase up to the menstrual cycle, and then the premenstrual phase, and again go back to menstrual phase. So we'll discuss one by one. Menstrual phase is accompanied by exfoliation of functional layer of endometrium with eventual hemorrhage. This phase is considered as the weeping of uterus for loss of an ovum. It weeps. That's why it comes out in the form of menstrual blood. This can be asked in the MCQ or in the Viva. Next comes the regenerative phase. It takes about 1 to 2 days to complete after the menstrual blood, menstruation. So again, the cells has to regenerate. It takes about 2 days completely. The epithelial cells from the bottom of the uterine glands proliferate by mitosis and covers the denuded surface of the mucous membrane. You can see here, this is the menstruation, followed by 2 days of regeneration. Then comes the proliferative phase, up to the level of ovulation. And after the 2 days after ovulation also, it will continue. You can see slowly it is building up. The stromal cells and the glands, these are the glands here. So the glands are increasing, and the glands are increasing in length also. The cells will proliferate by the mitotic division. So gradually the thickness of endometrium is increasing. Then comes the proliferative phase. You can see there, okay. The functional layer gradually increases in thickness from 1 to 3 mm before the time of ovulation. Proliferation is accompanied by the increased population of the stromal cells, elongation of the straight tubular uterine glands and spiral arteries of endometrium because of the functional endometrium, which is going to receive the fertilized egg. If not, it comes out in the form of menstrual cycle. The proliferative phase may extend 1 or 2 days after the ovulation also. Then comes the secretory phase. You can see there secretory after ovulation. So, to make a complete bed for reception of the ovum for the development of the fetus, functional layer increases in thickness to 2 to 3 times more than the preceding phase. Such increase in thickness takes place by enlargement of the stromal cells and by distension of the uterine glands. You can see there the endometrial glands which has increased, and then the secretions are given out into the lumen, into the uterine cavity. Then comes the premenstrual or ischemic phase. Ischemia means what? There will be vasoconstriction. It's not under our control, under the control of autonomic nervous system. So once it comes to know that there is no use, whatever the functional endometrium is there, it itself will act as a foreign body and it has to be thrown out of the uterus. So the body homeostasis will action in such a way that there will be a vasoconstriction in the basal part, basal lamina. So it appears 1 or 2 days prior to the onset of the next menstruation. This is associated with a much reduction in the thickness of the functional layer due to the regression of corpus luteum. The spiral arteries shorten and become more coiled. The arteries undergo successive vasoconstriction with blanching of the superficial part of the endometrium. Blanching means because of ischemia, there's no blood supply. So this blanching leads to gangrene. That means what? The cellular death of the distal part of the, whatever the functional component of the endometrium is there. So what happened? Suddenly what happened? There will be dilatation. So this is followed by vasodilatation. So when there is an immediate vasodilatation, there is a gush of blood with the consequent accumulation of pools of blood in the lamina propria through the devitalizing the vascular tissue. So the vascular tissue which has already devitalized, there is no use as it is dead. So that will come out in the form of menstrual blood. So the blood appears in the uterine lumen with the shedding of flakes of endometrium along with the ovum which has given out by the fallopian tube into the cavity of uterus. Then comes the myometrium. After the endometrium, deep to it, the myometrium made up of myo means the muscle. It is a smooth muscle in the wall of the uterus and there are 3 layers there. Outer longitudinal, middle circular and inner reticular has got its own functional values there. Outer longitudinal muscle, these are continuous with the corresponding muscles of the uterine tube at the superolateral angle. Some fibers spread through the broad ligament and extend into the pelvic wall, into the pelvic floor via the uterosacral ligament, tubocervical ligament and the ligament of Beckenrod's. These are the ligaments which are present at the level of supravaginal part of the cervix, which is called as cervical part of the uterus. From there, it extends anteriorly, extends posteriorly, and extends laterally. So through this, the long-term muscle cord also extends along with the ligament to attach itself into the lateral pelvic wall, anterior pelvic wall, and the posterior pelvic wall. So that is given in the form of uses. Long-term muscle helps in encouraging the uterus and expel the uterine content to the exterior without prolapse. So it encourages that it is going to avoid the prolapse of the uterus. Deep to it, there is a layer called as circular layer. Circular means the muscle is arranged circularly. It contains vascular bed, highly vascular, the stratum vasculature, ramify, and reaches the basal layer of lamina propria. Circular muscle of this layer forms a sort of sphincter at the lower part of the uterus. That means at the level of internal os, the circular muscle fibers become thickened and act as a physiological sphincter there. Though you cannot see anatomically, it is a sphincter and helps in retaining the content, that is the content of conception, and helps in maintaining it so that the abortion will not occur by nature. They help to retain the uterine content, that is the product of conception. So deep to the middle layer, that is the circular coat, the inner muscular coat is called as reticular layer. In the reticular layer, for like network, it is like a network. Then the muscle fibers are passing horizontally, muscle fibers are passing vertically, muscle fibers are passing obliquely. So that what happens, it forms a mesh-like structure deeply. And that is called as a reticular layer. The muscles of the inner layer are reticular in arrangement, and the endometrial vessels pass through the interstitials between them. So what happens? In between the reticulation, the blood vessels has to pass. So whenever these muscles contract immediately, what happens? The blood vessels will be strangulated, and that is responsible for vasoconstriction mechanically. On contraction, the muscle stops the uterine bleeding in menstruation during the separation of the placenta. So what happens? That is needed. So you are going to put some ice, you are going to compress the uterus, so that what happens? This reticular layer is compressed so that the excessive bleeding after the placental delivery can be avoided by this. Okay. Thus, the inner layer acts as a living ligature of the uterus. One of the MCQ question. Next, perimetrium of uterus. The perimetrium or serous coat is derived from the peritoneum, which covers the entire organ except two lateral borders, because they're the double layered broad ligament of each uterus extend laterally to attach itself into the lateral pelvic wall. That's why in between the two layers, along the lateral border, there it is devoid of peritoneum or the serous coat. Anterior surface of supravaginal part of the cervix, it is not present. Anterior surface, because anteriorly, as it covers the anterior surface of uterus, it again reflects over the superior surface of urinary bladder. So a part of anterior surface of the cervix is devoid of peritoneum. So there also I cannot see the perimetrium. Then comes the vaginal part of the cervix. Vaginal part means the part which is present within the vagina. So that is called a vaginal part. It's not supravaginal, it is vaginal part, which enters through the anterior wall of the vagina, invaginate, and opens out into the uppermost part of the vagina. So this part is enclosed within the vagina. That's why there is no perimetrium over this part of the cervix. On the posterior surface of uterus, the peritoneum is intimately adherent to the underlying muscle. The peritoneum on the anterior surface of uterus is adherent to the muscle in the upper part, but is separated by the uterus in the lower part by loose areolar tissue. So only in the upper part you can see the peritoneum, and in the lower part is the loose areolar tissue. It separates it and is not related with the perimetrium. Next, it is the fallopian tube as a part and parcel of uterus, extending on either side, formed by the Mullerian duct. Okay, fallopian tube, the synonyms are uterine tube, or it is also called as oviduct. Uterine tubes are pair of duct which convey the ovum from the ovary to the uterine cavity. The length of the uterine tube you can see here, uterine tube. The length is 10 centimeters. The fallopian tube having two openings. One opening which opens out into the uterine cavity here, uterine opening or uterine ostium, communicating with the lateral cavity of uterine, and measures about 1 mm in diameter. Then another end, you can see here, fimbriated end of the fallopian tube. It is called as pelvic opening or abdominal ostium. The abdominal ostium is about 2 mm in diameter, 1 to 2 mm in diameter, which opens out into the greater sac of peritoneum. It is this region. Okay, it's not completely covering the tubal pole of the ovary, but the fimbriated end of the fallopian tube. In the center, there will be a abdominal ostium or the opening through which it is communicating with the greater sac. Okay, that I told you, it produces a hissing sound when you are going to inflate the uterine cavity with the air. Parts of fallopian tube. Excuse me. Pars uterina tube or intramural or intestinal part, interstitial part. Interstitial means which is present within the myometrium of the uterus. It is 1 centimeter long and traverses the musculature of the uterus at junction of fundus and the body. This part. See this part, uterine tube present in this part as it opens out into the uterine cavity. Isthmus is a cord-like structure here. Isthmus means which bridges, measures about 3 centimeters in length. Hard cord-like made up of thick musculature, which connects the ampullary part with the intramural part, and that is called as isthmus. Then comes ampullary part of the fallopian tube, where actually the fertilization takes place. It is tortuous and measures about 5 to 6 centimeters in length. Then comes the infundibular part, conical shaped part here. It looks like a trumpet and about 1 centimeter long. The bottom of the infundibulum presents pelvic ostium or abdominal ostium, the circumference of which is provided with the fimbria. One of the fimbria is known as ovarian fimbria, is longer than the rest, which is connecting with the tubal pole of the ovary. And it's in direction of the ovum towards the abdominal ostium. Relations of uterine tube. So below, anastomosis of ovarian and uterine vessels. Spelling mistake. Okay, here there will be anastomosis. Ovarian artery, this is the infundibular pelvic ligament on either side, you can see. So it carries the ovarian artery, which is an outshoot from the abdominal aorta, and it passes like this. At the junction of lateral border of uterus and the inferior border of uterine tube, it is this particular region where there will be anastomosis of uterine artery with the ovarian artery. So below, there will be anastomosis of ovarian and uterine vessels. Below and in front, it is made up of round ligament of uterus. Okay, anterior it is not, anteriorly it is present. Below and behind, it is a ligament of ovary. So these are the structures which are related with the uterine tube. Now histological structure of the fallopian tube. It's made up of serous coat. Outside you can see it is a serous coat derived out of peritoneum. Deep to it, it is made up of a muscular coat. This is the muscular coat. So muscular coat is made up of outer. When you take a section, it looks like this because the fibers will be running longitudinally. So consists of outer longitudinal and inner circular. This is the inner circular coat and this is the outer longitudinal coat. Deep to it, it is made up of mucus coat. So mucous membrane present 3 to 6 primary longitudinal folds. See, 1. And again it folds. Again it branches and rebranches. So like that, it is made up of 3 to 6 primary longitudinal folds which give rise to number of secondary and tertiary folds. And that is needed for propelling the ovum towards the cavity of the fallopian tube. The epithelium is made up of single layer and consists of 3 types of cells. Single means simple layer, simple ciliated epithelium. It is not stratified. It is a single layer of epithelium. Though it folds and folds and folds, and it is converted into so many secondary and tertiary folds, the lining membrane is simple columnar epithelium and made up of cilia. ciliated epithelium. And in between the ciliated epithelium, some cells are secretory in function, which secrete mucus, which adds up for the bulk for pushing the fertilized content or the ovum into the uterine cavity. Then there are cells called as intercalary cells. Next, blood supply. The fallopian tube is supplied by uterine and ovarian artery, venous drainage, ovarian and uterine veins, lymphatic drainage, pre-aortic group of lymph nodes and lateral aortic group of lymph nodes arranged in front and anterolateral to the aorta. Intramural part of the superficial, intramural part means within the myometrium of the uterus is drained into the superficial inguinal group of lymph nodes. Then coming to the ovaries, these are a pair of female reproductive glands which are situated in the lesser pelvis, one on either side of the uterus. Okay, female reproductive glands, or it is also called as gonads, present in the lesser pelvis. It is called as ovarian fossa. It is also the content of true pelvis. Shape is almond. Size is length is 3 centimeters, breadth is 1.5 centimeters, and width is 1 centimeter. The external features, it is made up of two poles. You can see towards the tubal pole, towards the uterine pole. Made up of anterior surface and posterior surface. Made up of anterior border, posterior border, medial surface. This is the medial surface towards the uterus. This is the medial surface, the lateral surface. Anterior border and posterior. This is the posterior border. Anterior border is towards the mesovarian border. Okay, so that's it. And here you can see the uterus, which is vertical. Usually, in a nulliparous woman, the uterus will, the ovaries are vertically present. Okay, in a multiparous woman, because of the stretch of uterus in relation to the developing fetus within the womb of the mother, so what happens? The vertical position of ovary will be converted into horizontal. Then, before the puberty, prepubertal period, the surface of the ovary will be smooth and it is pinkish gray in color, and which changes into grayish in color after puberty because of ovulation. Because of ovulation, each time there is a the ovarian follicle will develop and convert into Graafian follicle and rupture. The surface of the ovary becomes corrugated. Okay, so you can see this is corrugated surface. Means undulations will be there because of rupture of the surface, the ovule because of ovulation. But pre-puberty, it is smooth surface. Made up of two ends, tubal end, related with the ovarian fimbria, suspense ligament of ovary, and connects to the uterine tube and the ovary to the pelvic brim. Uterine end connected to the lateral angle of the uterus by ligament of ovary that you have seen. Two borders, anterior border, it's called as mesovarian bed because the ovaries are attached to the posterior wall of broad ligament of uterus by extension of fold of posterior layer of broad ligament of uterus. So as it is extension, the anterior border is also called as mesovarial border. The posterior border is free border. They are made up of two surfaces. Towards the uterus, it's the medial surface. Towards the uterine tube, it's the lateral surface. Structure of ovary. The ovary is covered by a single layer of cubical or flattened cells known as germinal epithelium. The surface of the gland consists of medulla, composed of loose connective tissue, unstrapped muscles, blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves. There is a small collection of cells called as hilous cells, which are homologous to the interstitial cells of the testis. But there is no, they are like the interstitial cells, which are present in that there is no secretions which are given out by these hilous cells. Next, it is the cortex. The ovary is made up of outer cortex and the inner medulla. Medulla is made up of all lymphatics, blood vessels, and the hilous cells. The outer part within the epithelium made up of peritoneal covering, okay, cubical epithelium. The squamous epithelium of peritoneum will become the cubical epithelium. Deep to it, the cortex is present. This cortex is made up of stromal cells which are thickened beneath the germinal epithelium to form tunica albuginea. During reproductive period, the cortex is studded with the numerous follicular structures called functional units of the ovary in various phases of their development. These are related to sex hormones production and ovulation. And it is under the control of the hypothalamo-pituitary gonadal axis. The structures include primordial follicles, the maturing follicles, various stages of development you can see. Graphian follicle, and then ovulation. After ovulation, it is converted into corpus luteum. The blood supply of the ovary is ovarian artery, and the venous drainage is from the pampiniform plexus of veins which join with one another to form the ovarian vein, and this ovarian vein become a single vein and drain into the inferior vena cava on the right side directly. On the left side, it is drained into the left renal vein, through which indirectly it is drained into the inferior vena cava. The lymphatics is para-aortic group of lymph nodes, and the nerve supply by sympathetic nerves. Preganglion fibers are derived from T10 and T11 segments of the spinal cord. Then comes the cervix. The cervix is below the level of internal os. Cervix you can see here. The whole thing here is the cervix. This is the internal os. This is the uterine segment, upper uterine segment. See here, this is the neck or isthmus, and this is the internal os. This is the fusiform dilatation, what you can see in the cervix. This is the external os. This is the vaginal cavity here. Okay. So this is the myometrium covering the cervix, cervical part of the uterus. So the part which is outside the vagina, this is the supravaginal part of the cervix, and this is the intravaginal or vaginal part of the cervix. Cervix is below the level of internal os, is more fixed and more cylindrical in shape. Cervix is separated in front from the body by a constriction known as isthmus. This is the isthmus. And behind by a transverse ridge known as the tortuous uterinus. You can see here, this area. This is called as tortuous uterinus. This whole thing is a cervix here. This is the flap membrane. Okay, contains cervical canal. This is the canal, cervical canal, which communicates with the uterine cavity and with the vaginal cavity or vagina. So it communicates with the uterine cavity. It also communicates with the vagina. Okay. So measurement of the cervix. The length is 2.5 centimeters. Cervix is half the length of the body in adult, but twice the length of the body in a newborn. An MCQ question. Parts of cervix made up of two parts, above the vagina and within the vagina. So supravaginal part of the cervix. Now you can see here, this is the supravaginal part. In front it is non-peritoneal. Here the bladder will come here. See the bladder. See the peritoneum reflect directly over the superior surface of urinary bladder. So this part of the cervix, anterior surface of cervix, is not covered by the peritoneum. So it is non-peritoneal and is related to the base of the bladder. See, this is the base of the bladder. You can see the base here. It is related with the base of the bladder and is separated by here the blue color thing. What you can see here is nothing but the loose parametric tissue, loose areolar tissue or loose parametric tissue. So behind here you can see it is covered with the peritoneum. So over the rectum, middle part of the rectum, and you can see it is passing down, and it is passing over the vagina, and then over the complete of the posterior surface of cervix. So it is covered by peritoneum here. Okay, and this pouch which is formed here, the line striped area, it's called as the cul-de-sac, or it is also called as the pouch of Douglas. So this is the region where with the superlateral angle here, the fallopian tube and the ovary which are related with the uterine tube, the ovary when it ruptures, okay, so rupture means the Graafian follicle when it ruptures, the ovary becomes thin and the ovulation occurs. The ovum along with the follicular cells, okay, that will get collected in this particular region here. This is the greater sac of peritoneum. It gets collected and it is filled with the fluid, okay, so follicular fluid. So that is called as that we are going to see for follicular study whether it is filled with fluid or not. The fluid which is collected here gives the diagnosis that the ovulation has occurred. And you can tell the infertility couples for going for the natural intercourse for conception or for pooling. On each side, the ureter lies about 2 centimeters lateral to the cervix, and also it is also related with the uterine artery, and there is attachment of ligament of Meckenrath, lower attached margins of the broad ligament, and paracervical lymph node. I will show you the figure later. Okay, this is not the figure. In the supports of the uterus, I will show you. Next, it is the vaginal part of the cervix. It is conical in shape and the blunt tip rests on the posterior vaginal wall. The tip presents a depression for the external os. You can see the tip here. Presents this the depression for the external os, through which the cervical canal communicates with the vagina. The anterior lip, you can see the anterior lip here. This is the posterior lip. This is the anterior lip. Okay? Anterior lip is shorter and more muscular than the posterior lip, but it descends to the lower level due to the oblique direction of the uterus. See the oblique direction? The uterus invaginate the anterior wall of the vagina. Because of that, the anterior lip or the fornix here, what you can see is the fornix. This is the lip, these are the two lips, anterior lip, posterior lip. This extension of the vagina anteriorly, cavity of vagina is called as anterior fornix, and this posterior extension is called as posterior fornix of vagina. It descends to the lower level due to the oblique direction of the uterus. Shape of external os in different stages. You can see here, they rounded. You can see in nulliparous women before pregnancy. Okay, in nulliparous, who has not given birth to even a single baby. Okay, so here you can see it is rounded. It is pinhole. Sometimes it is in primary amenorrhea. It is pinhole, uterus will be there. There won't be opening at all. But here it is rounded in a nulliparous woman with the normal menstrual cycle. And here you can see it has become transverse slit-like. You can see it is divided into two lips, posterior lip and the anterior lip. In a multiparous woman, the external os will be in this shape. In a newborn, it is circular. In a nulliparous, also circular. In multiple parous, it presents as transverse slit. In primary amenorrhea, sometimes what happens, it will be pinhole. Structure of cervix. From outside to inward, it presents three coats. The outer serous coat, the middle muscular coat, and the deeper mucous coat. Serous coat is derived from the peritoneum outside. It covers the posterior surface of supravaginal part only, not vaginal part. Muscular coat consists of irregularly disposed smooth muscles. About 15% of this coat is muscular. See there, only 15%. Got it? Only 15% of muscular coat can be seen in the cervix. But it is not true in case of the body of uterus and the fundus of the uterus. In the cervical part, the muscular component is 15% and rest is produced by the collagenous and the elastic fibrous tissue. That's why it is very hard and very rigid, and also it is the most fixed part of the uterus. Next comes the mucous membrane deeply. Deep to the mucous membrane is made up of cervical canal. The lining membrane is simple columnar epithelium. Vaginal part of the cervix is lined by the stratified squamous epithelium. Vaginal part means what? You can go back. You can see here. This is the vaginal part of the cervix. So it is lined by the stratified squamous epithelium. The cervical canal is formed by simple columnar epithelium. Next, in the cervical canal, you can see a beautiful figure here. In the fern pattern of arrangement, radial arrangement, there's a median longitudinal fold here. Okay, and lateral extension, white band-like structures here. And this is called as arbor vitae uteri. What is arbor vitae uteri? The cervical canal is a fusiform or coronal section and communicates above with the uterine cavity through the internal os. Median longitudinal folds, this is the median longitudinal fold, are present along the anterior and posterior wall, posterior wall. From the sides of each fold, from the sides, here and here, from the sides of each fold, presents numerous palmate folds which pass upwards and laterally, downwards and laterally from the anterior fold, posterior fold from upwards and laterally. So resembling the branches of tree or fern pattern of arrangement. And this is called as arbor vitae uteri. So the secretion, if it is estrogen, the preponderance of estrogen phase, there will be, if you take a mucus stain, there will be like pores on the posterior surface of the fern, how you can see the sporophytes. In the same way, you can see the stain of the hormone which gets collected. So this is the lining membrane, what you can see in the cavity of the cervix, and it is called as arbor vitae uteri. The mucous membrane of the cervical canal present numerous mucus secreting glands, which are simple, tubular, or branched. Upper one-third of the cervical canal, including internal os, is known as functional isthmus. That means during the development of the uterus, with the growth of the fetus, what happens? It will be drawn into the uterine cavity. But it is not made up of the functional epithelium. It is lined by the ciliated columnar epithelium. It undergoes changes in the menstrual cycle. It is taken by the uterine cavity during second month of pregnancy to form the lower uterine segment. So, internal os is related with the lower uterine segment. Therefore, the functional isthmus behaves like a body than the cervix of uterus. But the difference is, you can see here, though it behaves like the body, fetal membranes, unlike the uterine body, are not adherent to this area. The fetal membranes, what you call it as the basalis, capsularis, paritalis. The paritalis is not attached to the isthmus because it's not actually the real part of body of uterus. Ligaments of your cervix. Now you can see here, this is the region, this is the cervix, cervical part of the uterus, urinary bladder, this is the rectum. You can see how it is fixed and avoids the prolapse of the uterus. And it is in pairs. Right side, left side, right side, left side, right side, left side. Uterosacral fold. Uteropubo, this is the pubis. Pubic symphysis. Pubo, cervical means what? Cervix of uterus. Pubo-cervical fold. Here, uterosacral fold, right and left. And here, thick ligament fixing the cervix or fixing the complete uterus itself to the lateral pelvic wall. This is called as ligament of Meckenroth or lateral ligament of uterus. Okay, or lateral cervical ligament. All one and the same. Lateral cervical ligament, lateral ligament of uterus, or transverse cervical ligament, or ligament of Meckenroth is one and the same. So which fixes laterally, fixes anteriorly, fixes posteriorly. It is also called as fascia of Denenwillers, fascia of Waldeyer. Okay, so these are the ligaments of cervix. These ligaments contain unstripped muscles, which leads off blood vessels and the lymphatics. Carry the blood vessels into the uterus. Carry the blood vessels into the uterus. Carry the blood vessels means what? Vein carry it from the uterus away. Artery carry the blood vessel into the uterus. That's why it's called a vessel. From to and fro, the vessels and the lymphatics are carried into the uterus and away from the uterus. That means not only the uterus, a part of uterus called the cervix, and also the vagina. They keep the cervix in position and prevent downward displacement of the uterus through the vagina. These are called as the ligaments of the cervix, or in true, it is the ligaments of uterus itself. So now coming on to the vagina, the last part. The vagina is the female organ of copulation. Okay, it's also called as scalpus, and it forms the lower part of birth canal, communicating the vaginal part of the cervix with the exterior at the vulva. The vagina is wider in the upper part and its anterior wall falls short of the posterior wall. That means what? Anterior wall of the vagina is short, Posterior wall of the vagina is long. So you can see it in the form of measurement. The length is, anterior wall is 7.5 centimeters and the posterior wall is 9 centimeters. Diameter of the canal is about 2.5 centimeters. And the pH, the lining membrane, the mucosal lining, produces the acidic secretion. The acidophilic cells are preponderant there, and the pH is 4 to 5. This is because of that the sperm will die as it passes through the vaginal wall. So this is in relation with Agneya property of the Artava. The vagina corresponds with the axis of the pelvic outlet and meets the cervix at the forward angle of the about 90 degrees angle, that you know. Fornices of the vagina, because of this, as it is invaginated anteriorly, there are 4 fornices which are created. The cavity, the uppermost part of the vagina, as it is invaginated by the cervix of uterus. So there is extension of vaginal cavity posterior to the cervix, anterior to the cervix, and lateral to the cervix. And these are called as fornices of vagina. Okay, the fornices are the clefts formed at the top of the vagina due to the projection of the cervix through the interval of vagina. So there are 4 fornices. So you can see right and left lateral fornix, anterior fornix here, and the posterior fornix. The lumen of vagina, on cross section, if you take, in the upper 1/3, the vagina is rounded in shape. In the middle 1/3, when you take a transverse section, it is like a transverse slit. Means what? Anterior wall press over the posterior wall. So when you take a transverse section of the middle 1/3 of vagina, it looks like a transverse slit. In the lower 1/3, it resembles the figure of H. Relations of vagina. You can see the vagina here, bladder, posterior surface, base of the urinary bladder, and the urethra. You can see the rectum, ampullary part of the rectum. This is the perineal body. Okay, these are the relations what you can see here. So anterior wall of vagina and anterior wall, how it is related. It is entirely non-peritoneum, isn't it? It is not covered by peritoneum. It is related to the base of the urinary bladder. This is the base of the urinary bladder. And terminal part of ureter. As the ureter enters into the supralateral angle of the uterus, urinary bladder. So it is related with the ureter, separated by the loose areolar tissue. In the lower part, the urethra is embedded in the anterior vaginal wall. See, this is the anterior vaginal wall. So this is the urethra, female urethra, 4 centimeters in length. It is embedded within the anterior wall of vagina. Next is the posterior wall. So why I am telling you is, there may be question for 5 marks regarding relations of vagina. Relations of vagina, 5 marks. Supports of uterus, 5 marks. Anatomy of uterus, 5 marks. Anatomy of ovary, 5 marks. Anatomy of vagina, 4 marks. Anatomy of fallopian tube, 5 marks. These are the questions which can be asked for 5 marks, and MCQ will be there. There will be 1 MCQ from embryology. Posterior wall, in the upper 1/4, it can be divided into 4 parts: upper 1/4, middle 2/4, and lower 1/4. So in the upper 1/4, the vagina is covered by peritoneum of recto-uterine pouch. Recto-uterine pouch. You see, vagina is covered by recto-uterine pouch or pouch of Douglas. And related to sigmoid colon, you can see here. Sigmoid colon. This is the rectum, sigmoid colon at the pelvic brim. Okay, related to sigmoid colon and the small intestine. The middle 2/4, here you can see this is the middle 2/4 part related to rectum. It is related to the rectum and separated by the rectum with the rectovaginal fascia. Condensation, the deep fascia in between the rectum and the uterus is called as rectovaginal fascia here. In the lower part, lower 1/4, the vagina is related to anal canal separated by the perineal body. You can see the perineal body. So what is perineal body? Perineal body is a fibromuscular node which is situated in the center of the perineum. diamond-shaped perineum. Okay, where there will be interlacing of all 9 muscles of the perineum, separating the pelvic cavity from that of the perineum, and that is called as the perineal body. Then comes the lateral walls. You can see the lateral wall, it's a coronal section taken, the cervix, uterine artery. You can see here the ureter, about 2 centimeter lateral. You can see this the ligament of Meckenroth or the transcervical ligament. Below that, you can see this is the pelvic diaphragm formed by sphincter urethrae, levator ani muscle. Below that, this is the deep perineal pouch. This is a superficial perineal pouch. Deep perineal pouch, superficial perineal pouch. This is a pelvic fascia here. Upper 1/3, middle 2/4, and then the lower 1/4 part. This is the superficial perineal pouch, deep perineal pouch. This is the pelvic fascia. This is the pelvic diaphragm formed by levator ani and the coccygeus, the ligament of Meckenroth, ureter, uterine artery, cervix, internal os, external os, vagina, passing through the pelvic content into the peritoneal content here, and the peritoneal content, the perineal content covered by the crus. You can see the erectile tissue here, bulb of vestibule on either side. Here, related to the lateral pelvic wall. Here, there will be the body of ischium, okay, ischial tuberosity, and from there the inferior arcade pubic ligament, which gives attachment for the ischiocavernosa. Means what? The crus of clitoris is attached here. Crus of, here it is the bulbospongiosis, which is called as bulb of vestibule, covered by the bulbospongiosis muscle. So these are the content or the relations in the lateral wall of the vagina. So it is crossed by the ureter and the uterine artery. There is the attachment of ligament of Meckenroth, embraced by the levator ani muscle, which acts as sphincter vaginae, and the bulb of vestibule, greater vestibular gland. Here will be the greater vestibular. Here, this is the hymen. Greater vestibular gland will be in the superficial perineal pouch, which opens out between the hymen and the labia minora. And this is the bulbospongiosus muscle covering the bulb of vestibule. So these are the relations, what you can see in the lateral relations of the vagina. Structure of vagina, from outside to inwards. Outer is the serous coat derived from the peritoneum and covers only the posterior fornix of vagina. Then comes the facial coat. Fascia means it is the superficial fascia. And then the deep fascia, derived from the visceral layer of pelvic fascia. Muscular coat consists of outer longitudinal and inner circular layers of the smooth muscle. Mucous membrane consists of lamina propria and the surface epithelium made up of stratified squamous epithelial cells. This is not, the heading is a mistake. It's not interior of the vagina. It's the exterior of the vagina, means external opening of the vagina. The hymen is an incomplete mucous fold which is situated close to the external orifice of the vagina. The various shapes of the hymen are annular. It may be annular, means at the margins of the outer opening of the vagina, it may be connected. It is attached, or it may be crescentric. Means the crescentric means one to the to one side of the wall, or it may be cribriform. Means completely the external opening of the vagina is covered, and the fold of mucous membrane is made up of sieve-like structure, made up of so many openings. Blood supply, cervicovaginal branch of uterine artery, vaginal artery, middle rectal artery, internal pudendal artery. Venous drainage, drain into internal iliac vein and internal pudendal vein. Lymphatic drainage, upper 1/3 internal and external iliac group of lymph nodes. Iliac, middle 1/3 internal iliac lymph nodes, because these are the structures which are passing through the ligament of Meckenroth to supply into the uterus. Along with the artery, the lymph nodes also travel. So through that, it is carried along the artery itself. That's why it's called as internal iliac group of lymph nodes, which are lined along the internal iliac artery. Lower 1/3 superficial inguinal group of lymph node, because lower 1/3 the arteries are supplied by the external pudendal artery, and the superficial and deep external pudendal are derived out of the femoral artery. So along with that artery, it enters into the superficial inguinal group of lymph node present in the femoral triangle. Nerve supply, vagina is supplied by the sympathetic and parasympathetic and from the pelvic plexus. Supports of the uterus include a number of interdependent factors which prevent the prolapse or downward displacement of the uterus through the vagina. Primary supports are two types. One is muscular, and then one more is fibromuscular. Muscular support and fibromuscular support. So primary supports under that, first category is muscular or active support. Pelvic diaphragm is a muscular support. So what are the content of pelvic diaphragm? It's made up of two muscles, levator and coccygeus. It's an MCQ question. What is perineal body? Perineal body is a fibromuscular node where there is interlacing of 9 muscles of the perineum. Which are the 9 muscles? Bulbospongiosus, covering the bulb of vestibule, right and left. Then comes the deep transverse perineum, superficial transverse perineum, 2 deep transverse perineum, 2 deep transverse, superficial transverse perineum, 2 levator 2 bulb of bulbosponges covering the bulb of vestibule, and then the muscle covering the external anal sphincter. These are the muscle which interlace at the perineal body. So it's a muscular support. Next, fibromuscular or mechanical support are the true supporters. It is the axis. For the inclination of the uterus itself forms the mechanical support. It falls over the urinary bladder. So that is the uterine axis. Anteversion and anteflexion of the uterus itself is a fibromuscular support. Pubocervical ligament from the body in pelvic surface of the pubis into the cervical part of the cervix, which holds the uterus anteriorly. Then comes the transcervical ligament, which pulls the uterus, fixes it into the lateral pelvic wall, which is called as ligament of Meckenrod. Then the uterosacral ligament, which pulls it posteriorly and fixes it into the pelvic surface of the uterus. And then comes the round ligament of uterus, which pulls the anterolateral angles of the uterus anteriorly passing through the inguinal canal. Round ligament of uterus is the content of inguinal canal and passes through the superficial inguinal ring, merges with the fibromuscular tissue in the mons pubis. So that is the round ligament of uterus. Okay, so here the uterosacral ligament pulling it posteriorly and round ligament of uterus pulling it anteriorly forms the couple force which anchors the uterus over the urinary bladder and forms the mechanical support for the uterus. Secondary supports are broad ligament of uterus. These are false supports. Broad ligament of uterus, that's nothing but the fold of peritoneum itself. Vesicouterine pouch or fold of peritoneum. Rectouterine or rectovaginal pouch. Pouch is nothing but the extension of folds of peritoneum itself over the rectum or over the urinary bladder. So all these forms the false supports of the uterus. And these are called as secondary supports. Ligaments of uterus, true ligaments and false ligaments. False ligaments are broad ligament, uterovesical fold, rectouterine fold. Anterior uterovesical, posterior rectovesical vaginal fold of peritoneum. And on either side is the broad ligament of uterus. Okay, this is the broad ligament. True ligaments are round ligament, ligament of Meckenrod, uterosacral, and pubocervical ligament. So this will be asked for 5 marks. Support of uterus, they may ask for 5 marks. Please prepare yourself. False ligament. You can see the broad ligament of uterus here. Each ligament is a broad fold of peritoneum consisting of 2 layers, extend from lateral border of uterus to the lateral pelvic wall. Both broad ligaments and the uterus forms a transverse partition which divides the pelvic cavity into anterior compartment for the bladder and posterior compartment for the sigmoid colon and the rectum. Uterovesical fold, this is also called as anterior false ligament, formed by the reflection of peritoneum from the anterior surface of body of uterus to the upper surface of urinary bladder. Rectovaginal fold is a posterior false ligament formed by the peritoneal reflection from the posterior fornix of the vagina to the rectum. This fold forms the floor of pouch of Douglas. True ligaments, round ligament. Each ligament is a fibromuscular band. Round ligament is a fibromuscular band and about 10 to 12 centimeters long, which lie between the 2 layers of broad ligament inferior to the uterine tube. Attachment of round ligament into the superolateral angle of uterus. Each ligament begins at the lateral angle of the uterus, runs forwards and laterally, passes through the deep inguinal ring, traverses the inguinal canal, and merges with the labia majors. That's what I told you. It pulls the fundus forwards and maintains the anteversion and anteflexion of the uterus. Ligament of Meckenrod are fan-shaped condensation of the endopelvic fascia on each side of the cervix, above the lateral levatriinae and around the uterine vessels. They connect the lateral aspect of the cervix and of the upper vaginal wall to the lateral pelvic wall. Each ligament keeps the cervix in position and prevents downward displacement of the uterus to the vagina. Hence, it is also called as cardinal ligament of uterus. And it is also, one point is missed here, it also carries the vessels and the lymphatics to and fro from the uterus. Uterosacral ligament. Each ligament extends from the cervix to the third sacral ligament. The ligament pulls the cervix braced backwards against the forward pull of the round ligament. That's why it is called as a couple force. The two ligaments form a couple that maintain the uterine axis in position. Pubocervical ligament. This ligament connects the cervix to the posterior surface of the pubis. The ligaments pull the cervix forwards and counteract the excessive traction of the uterosacral ligament. Okay, thank you very much for the patience listening. Thanks for the organizers. Thank you. Hello. Hello. Karthik.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, I have finished my lecture.
Yes, ma'am. Can we take the questions now, ma'am?
Okay.
Is it possible, ma'am, or shall we end?
One or two questions you can take.
Okay, ma'am. Guys, you can start asking questions. Ma'am will be taking one or two questions. So if you start posting the questions, ma'am will be answering those questions. Ma'am, one student is asking whether we can get the PDF of this PPT.
I will. I will share.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so
That's all. Okay. Thank
much.
you all. All the best for the examination. God bless you all.
Really, thanks for
You can
joining us,
also ask
ma'am.
questions by I
Through
will share
Jignasa.
the mail ID. You can ask questions. I will answer it. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. That's really generous of you. Thank you for this wonderful session, which has run up to almost 1 hour 30 minutes. Thanks from everyone at JDS on behalf of the whole organizing team behind this iron anatomy series. The team is working tirelessly every day and night to make this program successful, um, uh, for the benefit of our juniors, the current exam going students. So really thanks, ma'am, for from everyone at Jignasa for giving your valuable time and agreeing to deliver a session on female reproductive system. So that's all from our side, ma'am. And thank you, viewers, for joining. And thank you, Shobita, who was also co-host today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
We can end the session now, ma'am.
Thank you, Karthik.
Yes.
Stop.